afternoon, and welcome to the Hudson Institute. I'm delighted to have such a distinguished team of speakers here with us today. I'll make just a few quick remarks before introducing our panelists. On November 18, Secretary of State John Kerry delivered a major policy speech at the Organization of American States here in Washington. And in the middle of his speech, Secretary Kerry made the following comment about the state of democracy in Latin America. And he said, quote, "The Western Hemisphere is unified in its commitment to pursuing successful democracies in the way I described. One exception, of course, remains Cuba. Unfortunately, as our panelists will discuss in a moment, Cuba is not the only exception. In fact, no fewer than 5 Latin American countries, Venezuela, Bolivia, Nicaragua, Ecuador, and Argentina, have become elected autocracies led by radical populists who have kept the superficial trappings of democracy while persecuting political opponents, attacking independent media, and seeking near dictatorial control over public institutions. As a result, the rule of law in these nations has been either crippled or demolished. Today's conference will focus on Argentina, a country where press freedom has been trampled, where newspapers, journalists, and researchers have been targeted for political reasons, and where judicial independence has effectively been eradicated. The Kirchner government has weakened opposition media outlets with its controversial 2009 anti-monopoly law, and also with other authoritarian tactics. Just to give you one example, last February, Argentine supermarkets and electronic retailers told the Wall Street Journal that the government had ordered them to stop advertising in the country's top newspapers. Meanwhile, Kirchner government has repeatedly seized private businesses and other private property, including private pension funds, without honoring compensation agreements. Argentina has also been censured by the International Monetary Fund for deliberately publishing false economic data. These policies have led to increasing inflation, capital flight, and a massive black market in US dollars. According to a recent Financial Times dispatch, in the heart of downtown Buenos Aires, it is hard to walk more than 20 paces without being accosted by hawkers buying and selling dollars. To make things worse, Argentina may soon be headed for yet another sovereign default. While the government maintained its popularity during the so-called global commodity supercycle, President Kirchner's approval rating has fallen dramatically since her election in 2011. And her ruling coalition suffered big losses in the nation's October 2013 over the past year, Argentina has experienced large-scale anti-government protests, lengthy power outages, serious labor unrest, including police strikes, and deadly riots. As The Economist magazine notes in its latest issue, a combination of political torpor and economic fragility has once again raised questions about the precariousness of the country's position. Our speakers today will offer their thoughts on the state of Argentina's democracy and economy. In South America's second largest nation on the verge of a full-blown crisis, will the situation get worse before it gets better? If so, much worse? We'll consider these questions and some more. So without further ado, let me introduce our speakers this afternoon. Our first speaker will be Arturo Polsekansky. Arturo is an expert in international finance, emerging markets, and Latin American economics and politics. Since 2007, he has been on the full-time faculty of American University in Washington, D.C., as distinguished economist in residence, and since 2012, serving also as director of his International Economic Relations Program. He previously taught at Columbia University, New York University, and Williams College, but it is a fairly recent arrival to academia, having spent most of his professional career working as an international economist in Wall Street. Mr. Ferro, who sits right, comes to the end, joined Greylock Capital Management in 2009 as a portfolio manager and became a partner in August 2010 and co-chief investment officer with Hans Humes in October 2012. Mr. Ferro has 21 years experience working on Wall Street and in banking. He also holds a PhD from Duke University. Hernán Iglesias Quina was born in Buenos Aires. In August 2004, he moved to New York, where he writes for Latin American and Spanish magazines and newspapers, such as La Nación, Gato Pardo, Crossroads, Rolling Stone, Vanity Fair, Expansión, Brando, and Etiqueta Negra. His work has also appeared in Slate and Publishing Perspective. He is the author of 2 books, Golden Boys, Seis Parra, 2008, which is a history of Latin American investment bankers in Wall Street. And the other book is Miami, Seis Parra, 2010, a non-fiction portrait of South Florida's city. He's been an editor of the Wall Street Journal Americas in New York and a reporter for El País in Madrid. In 2006, he won the Premio Crónica Seis Parra, awarded by Gabriel Garcia Marquez's Foundation. Finally, Ambassador Lino Gutierrez is CEO of Gutierrez Global LLC, a consulting firm specializing in strategic advice for corporations and non-government organizations with overseas investments and trade. Ambassador Gutierrez retired from the U.S. Department of State in October of 2006 after a 29-year career. From 2003 to 2006, he served as United States Ambassador for Argentina. During his tenure in Argentina, Ambassador Gutierrez signed agreements on container security, narcotics, cooperation, counterterrorism, money laundering, terrorism security, and environmental cooperation with the Republic of Argentina. In October 2005, Ambassador Gutierrez received President Bush as an Plata Summit in the Americas, fifth visit by U.S. President to Argentina. Ambassador Gutierrez is a recipient of the Department of State Distinguished Honor Award and Meritorious Honor Award 3 times. So it's my pleasure to invite Dr. Polsekansky to the podium to make this question.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much to Ambassador Ndaramblum for the invitation to join this panel. The question he posed to us is, has Argentina become a democracy in name only? And I'm glad that he just didn't get the usual philosophers, political scientists, and other assorted experts into what democracy supposedly is all about, but rather people who have experienced democracy, and also some of us, the absence of democracy in our own flesh and bones. Growing up in Uruguay, a country with deep democratic roots, even there, I would say there was a kind of a legalistic version of what a democracy was. If there are elections, it must be a democracy. And that approach, I would say, prevails in much of Latin America, not only diplomatic and political circles, but even in intellectual circles. And in my own experience, it was only when I came to the United States many decades ago that my eyes opened up that, first of all, how the elections took place mattered. Were they competitive? Were they transparent? Were they honest? Were they vigorously fought? And of course, a whole host of other things that we associate with democracy, at least here in the United States and by now in a number of other countries, such as a Bill of Rights and the freedom to own property, to choose where you go to school, to choose what career or job you're going to hold, what faith you're going to believe in, and so on and so forth. And I think that if you take the very narrow view of what is democracy, one would have to say that Argentina is still a democracy because they still hold elections, and at municipal and the provincial or state and the federal level, and there are some changes. There is some rotation in the faces and so on. But indeed, as Ambassador Darrenblum has mentioned, it's beginning to look more and more like other countries which have elections that are assured. I mean, after all, in Cuba there are elections. There are municipal elections, there are provincial elections, and elections for the National Assembly. And so I don't think that, hopefully, we'll just go by the fact of whether there are elections or not, whether a country is democratic, in the sense that, as I say, we feel it in our bones. I think there's a lot more that comes with it. And indeed, as was mentioned, the democratic game has been rigged in Argentina in recent years, such that the outcomes are not as competitive as it would otherwise be, and the access to information and debates and so on do not occur the way they should. And the essential institutional foundations of the country have been eroded to such a degree that whoever sits in the Casa Rosada, in the executive house, really has tremendous arbitrary powers over how things actually take place on the ground. I'm just going to illustrate a little by talking, since I'm an economist, of some things that I care about and I know about in the area of economics and finance. For instance, I think it's fairly well known that the Central Bank of Argentina used to be independent in every way, legally and in practice. For several years now, it has become subservient to the executive. And this was, I think, crystallized better than any other way about 3 years ago, when then sitting central bank president was told to transfer money from the central bank to the treasury. And he checked with his legal counsel, and legal counsel said that this would be illegal because the proper parliamentary and other approval steps had not been taken, and we couldn't just transfer money on a phone call. He therefore refused and was promptly fired, although he refused to step down because he had been appointed with the consent of Congress. And turns out that the central bank was sufficiently independent that you could also not fire the central bank president with a phone call. But eventually, he was formally deposed for a maneuver involving Congress and had to leave office. And ever since then, the money has flowed freely from the central bank's accounts to the treasury accounts. And this is one of the reasons why, of course, the monetary expansion in Argentina is out of control, and also why the official international reserves of the central bank have been dropping precipitously in the past couple of years, despite the imposition of widespread controls on imports and controls on the purchase of dollars and on profit remittances and other capital outflows. What may not be known as well is that other economic institutions of importance have also been terribly undermined. I had occasion to do a study on the largest commercial bank in Argentina, which is a state-owned bank called Banco de la Nación Argentina. This bank was founded in the late 1800s, and its purpose was to capture deposits from the government and also from the public and channel credit to those who couldn't otherwise get it, in particular to farmers, to refund the crops of farmers. And that was its mission as per its charter, founding charter, and that is what it did for 100+ years, until recently. Until recently, it's become another piggy bank of the executive branch. It has been required to lend to the government, and the Banco de la Nación has become a significant buyer of bonds issued by the government, such that by now nearly half of Banco de la Nación Argentina's assets, namely a third of its loans and the overwhelming majority of its bond portfolio, is exposure to the public sector. It's IOUs of the central government. So its mission, like that of the central bank, has been completely distorted. I could go on and on. The pension system was mentioned. People in Argentina had the equivalent of 401ks accounts. Now it's been nationalized or renationalized because, of course, previously it was a state-run pension system. And the pension fund, which has about $45 billion equivalent in savings to invest, is completely stuffed to the gills with government paper, yielding very low interest rates for the most part. So that pensioners in Argentina, when it comes time, will be hard-pressed to receive any kind of living pension because the assets of the pension fund, he says, have been degraded so much. Mention was also made, and I will conclude shortly, that the prosecution and persecution of reporters, of business people, union people, and even economists. I mean, as an economist, it's unheard of that we are not only persecuted but prosecuted. I must tell you, but in Argentina, over recent years, everything has been possible. And indeed, you may know, because the official statistics on inflation, as was mentioned, have not been reporting the truth in the past half dozen years, many private economic consultants' main occupation became trying to measure the real rate of inflation and to report that to their clients. And when they did that, and especially when they made it public to the press, they were at first intimidated and then actually prosecuted. Fortunately, at least in that area, the man in charge of the intimidation and prosecution is no longer in his job. I'm talking about Secretary Moreno, who was supposed to move to Italy, but the intimidation remains, and to this day, most of the economists in Argentina do not reveal what their studies find in terms of inflation or other bad news, because they're afraid, of course. Once you have been fined and sued and so on, you're very careful. So this is the kind of climate that is there, and so my answer to the question, has Argentina become a democracy in name only? I would say my answer is yes, it has. Thank you.
Thank you, Embajador, Ambassador, for inviting me. Thank you all for coming. Actually, I published 3 books. One of them very recently, like a couple months ago. And thinking about what to say today, I realized that the 3 of them deal with the relationship of Argentina with the US or with the rest of the world, which I think it's an important way to how to approach Argentina in the last decade. How it has a very problematic and changing relationship with the rest of the world, including Uruguay. It's very nearby and very similar in many ways, but we have a very difficult relationship with them too. So, also want to make a disclaimer. In a couple months, after 10 years in Manhattan, I'm moving back to Buenos Aires to work in politics. So everything I'm going to say, I mean, it's about me, but it's also someone that after 20 years of literature and journalism is like jumping definitely into politics. And the last time I moved to Buenos Aires was in mid-2001 from Madrid, right before the economy collapsed and half of the country collapsed. So people say I don't choose very well the timings of my movings to Buenos Aires, and it would be true. But they don't have to blame me. I don't think it's my fault. So I want to talk a bit about what in this decade we've called the relato in Argentina, or the narrative. The relato is something that the government and the Kirchnerist galaxy, it's a story that they started telling themselves and the rest of the country about recent history, about who they are and who they are not. Most important, and being here surrounded by economists and serious people. Some people would say that this cultural stuff is a bit fluff or whatever, but I think that the relato and the intellectual climate of this decade was very important to explain Argentina in these years. And I would like to make only like 2 points. One that was very important, and another one that it's broken or it's been finally it lost the appeal it had, and now people are able to contrast it and to talk about it. So this relato, historically, and I mean, to divide in 3 points, the relato is, it's a very populist, it's not very sophisticated, but it was very strong after the crisis of 2001, 2002. Kirchner and a lot of people around them, they picked up the pieces with a discourse against the reforms of the 90s, and they picked up a human rights discourse that they progressively manipulated in their own benefit. And putting nationalism here and populism there, they created a set of rules and a set of answers that for 5 years it was really, really very strong and contributed to fend off any attacks that the opposition or the media could have against them. I think it started to break in 2008 in the war against the campo, against the farmers, when an argument about taxes, export taxes, was justified by the government only in ideological terms. And again, as against them, the farmers are oligarchs, and blah, blah. It didn't work. It barely didn't work, because if only one person had voted differently, it would have worked. But then, starting in February 2012, there was a big train accident in Buenos Aires where like 51 people died, and the reaction of the government was also like very, very, very bad. And also they tried to frame it in ideological terms, and it didn't work. And since then, this the narrative is increasingly not working for them. Also, inflation, they've been framing inflation in ideological terms for many years. A lot of people believed that at the beginning, almost nobody does now. When they say, for example, when you were mentioning the change of the charter of the central bank, at that point, this relato was still very strong. It was amazing how little controversy that provoked in Argentina. Nobody really thought that. Nobody could say in public that the central bank should be independent, because it was politically death at that point. Today is different, I think, or I hope, but it shows how the grasp that the Kirchner had on the public discourse, or to feel the public humor, has changed, and it's not as solid as before. For example, one way that you could see the dominance of this discourse was when people not very ideological or political, like actors or athletes or just random people on TV, would say the things that the government wanted to say, and you ask them, why are these people doing that? There's no benefit from them, or no concrete benefit, and still they pick up the ideas that the government was spreading against recent history about the military dictatorship, about privatization, about generally like a lot of things the government used very well, and it's not doing so well anymore. So what should we do now? Because a danger with these things, when so many years are held by a single pin of a shared consciousness, as they say, is that when people say that the king is naked, there's nothing to hold on to. I think we are in that slippery slope now. The magic aura that the government had, they don't have it, and they never really had the policy, or maybe at the beginning, to back all the things that we're saying. So now it's a dangerous time, because there's no really ideas to hold the government in any way. The new head of the army is a guy has a very problematic past, a typical guy that the Kirchner would have condemned a few years ago only, and now they promote him to head the army. So there's a lot of contradiction and a lot of confusion. So what should we do with what's going to happen? What would be best to happen? I don't really know. Some people say that a financial crisis would help discredit the populism or the economic nationalism of the latest years. Being Argentinian, first, I don't want a crisis, and second, it never happens like that way. I mean, these things tend to survive somewhere. Somewhere, these ideas, they looked buried under 3 layers of anything 10 years ago, 12 years ago, and they showed to be very much alive. So I don't think a crisis would help. But I really think it should be addressed, and an alternative model, an alternative relato narrative has to be proposed by the opposition. I don't think they are doing that either. So the Kirchner's view of the world, which is very defensive, protectionist, nationalist, like very much, he has very clear ideas about the past, but not so very clear ideas about the future. That narrative is imploding, but it's creating a void. Nobody really now is moving forward with a clear view of the world, saying, okay, let's be, I don't know, Chile, or let's be Uruguay, or for like, to have like a simple model. Or let's be Australia, that would be a bit ambitious right now. So I think, although it's a game sometimes played by few people, like intellectuals or journalists or people moving around some circles, if used well, it has an amazing power to trickle down into non-political people and to shape the ideas of the whole public opinion and help move the country in a direction more robust and more dynamic than it is now, that is clearly in a spiral where it's hard to, I don't know, to decide what it's going to be. An example with this of this is there's a Quilmes commercial that I saw in Buenos Aires a couple of months ago. Quilmes is the most popular beer in Argentina. It's not Argentina, it's owned by a Brazilian, Belgian, American conglomerate, but has a very nationalistic advertising it's had for many, many years. And this commercial was like against football shirts of foreign teams and foreign national teams. So we would make fun of some kid in Buenos Aires wearing a Barcelona shirt. You should wear a shirt of your own neighborhood team and stuff. And if you don't live there, it's creepy. It's almost scary, because it's really it creates a very strong barrier between what's for local and what is foreign, which other countries don't see that way. Don't see the border like such big jump. And the Kirchners have demonstrated this in many things, like punishing people who want to go abroad, making fun of people who go to Miami on vacation and stuff. But so if a beer commercial features now such a simplistic, nationalistic message, it means that they pick up ideas that are in the air, that they think they are sanctioned and they're going to be well received by most of the people, and it reinforces a way of thinking that it might change in the next few years, but it would be, I think, and my main message is that it should be addressed by other political parties, and I think one of my jobs is going to be that, and try to build a new direction for Argentina, because if not, someone else will cover the void. And one of the things that could happen is like what I call an uncontrolled backlash to the 90s, which is a swerve again to like a pro-market policies, but not framed in a way, in a democratic way or an egalitarian way, like sort of what happened at some points in the 90s too. So it's a good moment to build on top of the 90s, and if nobody addresses this, I don't think it's going to happen. So I try to stay optimistic. It's partially because it's my own interest, I'm moving there. But, well, that's it. Thank you.
afternoon. Thanks to the Hudson Institute for inviting me. And thanks all of you for being here. I think that enough has been said about how things are horrendous in Argentina, and I tend to agree with absolutely everything that I heard so far. My interest is to address the question of the crossroads. Is Argentina at the crossroads, and why it might be the case? And for that, I think it's good to put a little bit of history, political and economic history of the Kirchner decade. And after that, I will address kind of where I see some of the possible venues for Argentina to get out of the current situation or crash into a wall that I think is the likely outcome of the status quo as of this point. I think I never liked the Kirchner, for the record. I've been living in the States for 20 years. And it's funny when you live here as an Argentine, because people back home always tell you either that the fact that I live here was the best decision I've made in my life, or the worst. When things are going well, everyone is very bullish and you're wasting your time in America. When things are bad, oh, you were so smart. And it's the same country, and it's just like this, the same people. And that is sort of providing me sort of a gauge of how things are. And now most people are telling me how smart I am that I live here. So things are really getting bad. But anyway, leaving that aside, I must say that, as I said, I never liked the Kirchner, but I must admit that I seriously admire, particularly Nestor, for his ability to use economic policy to acquire political power. The way he has conducted the affairs of the country was primarily driven not by ideology, but just by being able to control as much power as he could. And if you think that he took power with 22% of the vote, it sort of made sense at the beginning for him to act that way. And he got into a situation in which the economy had crashed post-2001, so naturally, after a crash like that, you have a massive rebound. And that came at the same time that you had a huge turnaround in commodity prices. So by around 2006, 2007, Argentina was enjoying the best terms of exchange it had enjoyed in decades. Okay. What did he do with that? It clearly, I think, two things that you can then dress up in the relato or the narrative to make it look whatever, but essentially he started subsidizing sectors through tariffs. He had the money. So it's much better, instead of having market prices and people pay what they are supposed to pay, for me to give you the money to pay them. Because then I can decide, if you like me, I pay you. If you don't like me, I don't give you the money. Both with people and with companies. Another one that it was even more subtle, and it continues through now, is this obsession on growth. And you can assume that obviously every economy, every politician wants to grow an economy because that's good. Everyone lives better. But in Argentina, acquired a different dimension. If you have a budget of 4% and the country grows at 8%, naturally you're going to get much more resources in terms of taxes. Those are nowhere to be seen in the budget. Those come to me, and I do whatever I want with them. And I'm not going to address the whole issue of corruption, because obviously to some extent it's the big elephant in the room, but the ability to use that money to put pressure on provinces that are marginalized or not, and to distribute that money in every way I see fit, really turned this administration into a very powerful political machine. Obviously, the disregard for Republican principles, it's sort of another version of this, of just saying, I want just to have power and do whatever I want, and to be able to perpetrate myself in time. All these policies were sustainable because post-crisis, Argentina suffered a major devaluation, so the external sector was running a surplus, and the fiscal sector, after the default of 2001, was also running a surplus. Things started to change post-2007 because this growth cost inflation, and the money, the sort of wealth shock that Argentina suffered stopped. So then that is when you start seeing arbitrary measures that again were wrapped in this aura of ideology, when in fact was just perpetuating the model of maintaining power. You had obviously first the attack on the bank, on the farm sector to raise taxes, then the privatization of the nationalization of pension funds, central bank, Repsol. And it's interesting, one statistic really shocked me. Argentina had the government sort of paying salaries and subsidies to 3 million people around 2003. That moved to 7 million people in 2007, and now it's 13 million people. Okay, so you can imagine that the money had to come from somewhere. And now, obviously, the inflation has been eroding the external sector because the currency now is massively overvalued. So the external surplus is gone. The fiscal surplus is also gone. So you have the situation that now is facing Argentina, that it doesn't have many policy options of how to face the last 2 years of government. So when people ask, is Argentina at the crossroad? I look at the policies of the last 10 years in Argentina, and in essence, they have never changed. And it looks like some actions are taken, but the only actions that are taken is to continue this model of centralization of power. And it's not clear to me, or actually I have a theory that, it's a bit concerning, that perhaps the president really believes that her policies really made a difference in Argentina, when actually Argentina has been growing in spite of a lot of those policies in the past 10 years. So you're in a situation now that we are at a crossroad only in the sense that Argentina has still the ability to change course and not crashing the economy in one of the typical sort of boom and bust cycles of Argentina. It has more time than it has in others because the external sector remains favorable to the country, and with some of the measures, particularly through the local IRS and with the pressure that they have in the exchange market, it's not easy for people to really prompt a crisis, unlike what happened during hyperinflation other times in Argentina in the past. But that does not mean that if you think that the country had an average of $45 billion in central bank reserves until September of 2012. By December of 2012, it dropped to 42. Through 2013, it dropped 13 billion. So it's now at 30, and actually they're debating whether this week or next week is going to pierce 30 billion. That is a statistic that is just a pure reflection of the fact that Argentina now is using central bank reserves to pay amortizations of debt, and is using to cover the fiscal deficit. Not the fiscal, the commercial, no longer surplus, but now effectively the balance of payments is negative. So, surprisingly, I see Argentina being sort of willingly going to one of the most silly self-inflicted crises it has ever confronted. Because usually in the past there were objective circumstances that put the country in trouble. Because even if you look at the situation in 2001, commodity prices were at an all-time low by November of the crisis that started in 2001. So there was an international context very much against Argentina. This is just policy driven. And if the president continues to think that things are okay and tolerable, I doubt that Argentina can reach 2015 in one piece. Now, what is going to prompt that? My sense that more likely, or the most likely scenario is some bout of really, really high inflation, because it's the only variable that people will have to express rejection of the model. It's just going and buying things and just rejecting money, similar to what happened in other periods of hyperinflation. The three solutions that are fairly obvious, but I don't think that the government will likely embrace easily. The first one will be to solve the fiscal problem and stop the transfers. But for a government that is in such a weakened state as the current administration is, it's very hard that they're going to be able to, not only, let's assume even if they want, that they will be able to implement the cuts that they will need to implement to fix this problem. The second one is the one that they're already implementing, but in a way that is so timid that I don't think is going to work. That is for them to devalue. A devaluation will bring back the competitiveness of the external sector, and it will likely increase exports, decrease imports, and help address the balance of payment situation. Now, again, given inflation, the official rate should be at least 8.5, 9, and it's at 6.6. 30% devaluation, if it happens, is one of the few anchors that macro policy has in Argentina, because essentially the government can printing money like it's for free. The third one is the one that is closer to my activity, is the whole issue of the holdouts. And I will spend sort of the rest of my presentation discussing a little bit the situation, because you hear a lot of policy discussions, particularly nowadays coming out of the IMF and other sectors, talking about how the system of defaults and restructurings of debt is broken. Moody's published a very good report in July of 2013, describing all the defaults between 1983 to 2013, 106 of them. It's interesting, it's a big number. And of all of those, it highlights that there were two that were problematic. One was Dominican Republic, and the second one is Argentina. So clearly, it's interesting when Argentina is put in the context of fixing a problem that is supposed to be not working, when Argentina is clearly the outlier and a pathological case of restructuring, and not something that should be promoting a policy decision. When Argentina went through the default, that we can argue whether it was necessary or not, but let's assume that it was necessary. Unlike other countries, it decided to offer a unilateral proposal, and with some bravado, and people were impressed that Argentina had achieved impressive haircuts. But the consequence of that approach is that only 76% of the debtors accepted. When you do that, you are leaving 24, obviously, percent that not only don't accept, but it gives enough size for sophisticated distress funds to take a position and trying to, litigate that in court. Obviously, that happened in Argentina, and it's interesting. Again, most other cases, when it's voluntary, you have more than 90% participation, so there is no room, and there is no holdouts, and there is no holdout problem. Okay? So that happened in 2005, but since then, Argentina, instead of using the time to try to negotiate away the problem in a discreet way at cents on the dollar, I don't know if it was their decision or advised by the legal counsel, they used a tactic of delaying, thinking that the problem will accrue to someone else. Unfortunately, also they wanted to perpetuate themselves in power, so at the end of the day, the problem, as a boomerang, came back to them. And it's interesting because, for professional reasons, I follow quite a lot the case, and you see how the federal judge in New York was at the beginning very sympathetic to the country, because at the end of the day, it was a country in crisis. There were reasons for them to default. And after 5 years of being, I was going to say an impolite word, but just taking out on a ride, and for the government in Argentina says that at the end of the day, no matter what the judge would say, they wouldn't pay, or stuff like that, the judge ended up issuing a scathing judgment against Argentina based on the proper application of New York law, and confirmed by the Second Court of Appeals. And now Argentina is likely to lose also in the Supreme Court. But when you think about all this, it's not about whether holdouts are good or bad, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. But you see, when you do things bad from a policy standpoint, the consequences accrues to you. If Argentina were to fix this problem, Argentina would be reintegrated in the international capital markets. The big advantage of that is that there are at least 400 billion of funds indexed to emerging market assets, of which Argentina cannot participate because it's there, it's technically local or idiosyncratic because it doesn't trade in international markets. Argentina could easily get $5 to $10 billion of natural demand of those index funds, whether they like Argentina or not, having to buy that debt if they were to fix this problem. The only obstacle for them is just ideology at this point, and it's a very technical issue, so why they don't do it escapes me. So, bottom line as a conclusion, I think that it's impossible to read too much into the ideology of the government. I think it's just mostly how they can perpetrate in power, and they're losing it. So how they may react, I don't know. Whether the rest of the Argentine society, particularly the Peronist Party, allow her to crush the country when it doesn't need to, that's yet to be seen. And in a way, if the country allows this to continue, it's no longer a problem effectively of the Kirchner, it's a problem of the Argentines. And being one of them is kind of sad. But it's so evident that this is unnecessary and going into the wrong direction that hopefully someone will, or some group of people, particularly those with current political power, do something to prevent this madness to continue. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. Thanks to the Hudson Institute and my good friend Jaime, Ambassador Darren Bloom, for this invitation. There's an advantage and a disadvantage for going last. You get to hear everybody else's point of view and then adjust yours accordingly. Or they say everything you were going to say and then you sound repetitive. But in any case, I'll try not to be repetitive because I agree with a lot of what has been said here. These are very daunting topics that you have chosen today. And when you look at democracy in the Western Hemisphere, when you think of a democratic tradition, you think of countries like your country, Costa Rica, Chile, and Uruguay. In the case of Argentina, it's been a more complicated picture, more mixed. There have been periods of democracy, 1916 to 1930. From 1930 to 1983, you had a period where the military was an arbiter one way or another. It was just behind the scenes, waiting to pounce. And then since 83, you've had democracy, but democracy has brought many problems, hyperinflation under the last months of Alfonsín, of course, 2001, 2002, the worst economic crisis in Argentine history, President de la Rua being forced out by taking a helicopter from the rooftop of the Casa Rosada. Then you had the devaluation, the default, 5 presidents in a week, and yet democracy did survive, and you had democratic elections in 2003, and that is when the period of Kirchnerismo begins. First with Nestor Kirchner in 2003, 2007, and then Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner, his wife, since then. I think the original idea was that they would alternate, and Nestor would be president the first term, Cristina the second, Nestor the third, and so forth. Unfortunately, Nestor died, and that did away with that arrangement. But it's been a fascinating period. And what is the Kirchnerismo model? You've heard about some of it here. I mean, I think no one really knew when Nestor came to power in 2003, President Nestor Kirchner. He was a governor from Santa Cruz, the province of Santa Cruz in the south. It was not that well known politically. When someone said he was elected with 22% of the vote, that was because Carlos Menem withdrew, knowing he would suffer a massive defeat. And so Nestor lacked the legitimacy in some eyes of getting a resounding electoral victory. And yet he managed to build power, as Diego said, through his economic policies and everything. So their model was very much, looking at history and getting history right in their view, which meant the history of the military abuses and in fact the dirty war, which is a terrible period of Argentina, and highlighting that and rescinding some agreements that had been made by his predecessors, Alfonsín and Menem, of amnesty for many of those participants. But looking at more, really only one side of the equation, and that's the abuses of the military government, and leaving any abuses by former guerrillas pretty much untouched. So it was a vaguely populist government. It was pretty unclear in the beginning, because in the beginning, I don't know if you all remember this, but we were pleasantly surprised by some of the economic policies of Mr. Kirchner. Who ever heard of a Peronist who could balance a budget? Well, he did the first few years. He built up reserves. He negotiated, after a fashion, with the creditors, more of a take it or leave it type of negotiation. But yet, some people were impressed that he got 76% to accept. And I remember we had an embassy meeting in Buenos Aires where my treasury attaché said, well, they've gotten 76% to accept, so now they will mop up the remaining holdouts and work out a deal with them. Well, we're still waiting many years after the fact for that agreement that never came. And their view of the world was a little different from what we were used to. I mean, I think some of the policies that they adopted reminded me of Eastern Europe in the 1950s. This whole thing about state control of the economy after Argentina had privatized many of his, inefficient institutions and all that. And the subsidy, of course, of groups like the piqueteros and other political action groups, you could understand that up to a point, because President de la Rúa, his predecessor, had been brought down because 2 people had been killed in street demonstrations. And the Argentine public did not want to tolerate more deaths. So President Kirchner adopted the policy, okay, if you want to demonstrate, fine. If you want to block traffic, fine, I'm not going to touch you. So that was part of I think the model, the Kirchner model is make deals with those who oppose you, especially in the left, subsidize them, and play one against the other. And then you declare war on, you blame others, or maybe you blame international financial institutions like the IMF, declare war on the IMF. For the first 2 years, 2003 to 2005, he did not say anything about the West, per se, or the United States of America. But then in Mar del Plata, 2005, by then, he had decided that to cast his lot with the Chavezes and other populists of the hemisphere, and picked that occasion where he hosted all the countries of the hemisphere in Buenos Aires to rail against the Washington Consensus in the United States, where President Bush came to Argentina. So by then, he had cast his lot, and ever since then, relations with the U.S. have deteriorated. A little more on that now. But as far as democracy, I mean, the first few years, even though the government's tactics have always been heavy-handed against their opponents, the press, we saw that from the beginning. I mean, you saw that in Santa Cruz province. When Nestor Kirchner was governor, he used to like to apply pressure on those who opposed him. And he used these same tactics, but I don't think anybody was that worried about democracy in 2005, 2006. But gradually things got worse. And to the point that when you look around today, what do you see in Argentina? You see police strikes, you see energy cuts, you see looting, you see a depletion of reserves, you see runaway inflation with an official rate of 10.5%, a real rate of 25 to 30%, and some say could reach 50% this year. And now, of course, labor is demanding that they catch up to the inflation, so they're meeting right now to demand a 30% raise to the minimum wage. You see corruption scandals among government ministers. You see, a number of a rising fiscal deficit, lack of independence of the central bank and others. So the picture is not pretty. I think what President Cristina Kirchner was hoping was that she would be able to extend her term by calling for a constitutional amendment that would let her run again in 2015. That appears to have failed with the latest election. She did not get the 2/3 that she would need in order to carry out this reform. So what you're seeing now is, the words of Garcia Marquez, a chronicle of a death foretold. I think we're seeing the death of Kirchnerismo. But at what cost? Because you're also seeing a train wreck, a slow train wreck in what is the Argentine economy right now. So what to do? I agree with my colleagues that you're not likely to see an 180-degree turn and start adopting some of the proposals Diego proposed by the Argentine government. After all, Cristina Kirchner once, when told, some of your actions are putting you outside the world economy, she said, well, when we were hand in hand with the world economy, things did not go so well, did they? So I'm quite happy to be outside of the world economy. And I think that's her mentality. I don't think that she believes that her economic policies have been responsible for the 9% growth that was achieved for many years. I hope not, but one never knows. Maybe somebody's telling her it's your economic genius that's doing this, when in fact it's the Chinese buying up soybeans and other commodities. So the question is, can she really close the deal and finish out her term? Because one thing Peronists are known for in Argentina is finishing. They're good closers. So like radicals who cannot last through the end of their terms, as we saw with Presidents Alfonsín, who gave up power early to President Menem, who was the president-elect, and De La Rua was forced out of office. Peronists have taken pride in being able to close a deal, or perpetuating the deal in some cases. So that is a question. All kinds of rumors in Buenos Aires. I don't know if you heard, Diego, but now they're talking about possible resignation scenarios. Although President Cristina Kirchner kind of protected herself against that by appointing a vice president that I don't think anybody wants to become president, who has not a very good reputation, etc. So what happens in the next almost 2 years? So others talk about early elections, possibility of early elections. Will that be a scenario? I think for the sake of democracy, any solution has to be a democratic one. It should be, and we should all encourage it. And you're starting to see some adjustment of their policies. They're talking to Repsol. I remember we did a conference a year ago after they had taken over the Repsol properties in Argentina without compensation, and now there are talks. They're offering to pay, they're not offering to pay book value, but they're offering to pay something in compensation with Repsol. This is the first. The removal of Minister Guillermo Moreno, who was known for strong-arming the private sector, I think can only be seen as a positive development. They're actually paying some of the companies that have won judgments against Argentina in the World Bank arbitration mechanism, the ICSID, for the first time. Argentina had lost 28 rulings in the ICSID and not paid a penny. Now they're actually negotiating, paying something, bonds, whatever, but that's a positive development. I tend to agree with the other speakers, this is probably too little too late at this point. And, democracy, I think, has and will survive, but certainly we should all be worried about the attacks on institutions that have taken place. And the Supreme Court actually was able to stop one initiative, which was a judicial reform that would have resulted in the government appointing judges. That was thwarted by the Supreme Court. So there are some institutions that are still showing some life in Argentina. What will the Kirchners leave behind? I mean, I think any new president will have his or her work cut out for them with what is left behind. 13 million people living on subsidies. What do you do with them? Anything you do is going to be politically difficult. But I can tell you that of the four presidential candidates that have appeared to be on the horizon, Scioli, Massa, De La Sota, Binner, Macri, I think any one of them would have a more realistic view of the world and the world economy and the Argentine economy. And I can tell you the United States would almost assuredly have better relations with any of the new Argentine president than with the current one. Our relations have been pretty stagnant with Argentina, starting with Mar del Plata in 2005, and then the Valija Gate scandal. After that, where President Cristina Kirchner accused the U.S. of planning a garbage operation against Argentina because a Venezuelan tourist was caught with a valise with $800,000 or something like that, that was supposedly destined for the Cristina Kirchner campaign, for Hugo Chavez, and the accusation was that this was planned by the U.S. judicial authorities, etc. And then the regrettable scandal of having the Argentine foreign minister going to the airport and opening up U.S. Diplomatic pouches that had materials that were to be used in a training exercise with the Argentine police, including some weapons, and they accused us of trying to smuggle weapons, trying to bring in drugs. There was some morphine in case there was an accident, somebody got shot. But it was clearly a trumped-up operation destined to seize the headlines. Given those experiences, what the U.S. has done is continue cooperation in areas that work, like science, education, health, environment, and energy. Even if the U.S. wanted to help, we are prevented from doing so by the Brooke Amendment, which, because of Argentina's default against lack of payment for the Paris Club debt, so Argentina would have to, strike a deal with the holdouts, pay the Paris Club debt, and even restore relations with the IMF before the Brooke Amendment could be lifted. So for the current time, the U.S. is forced to vote against Argentine requests for loans in the international financial institutions. So that is a picture, but I can assure you the future will be better. Thanks.
We have now some time for questions and answers and comments. Hold on a second.
Daniel Manzoni from Argentina. I'm listening to you. Thank you very much for your knowledge and expertise that you present. It reminds me of an interview that was done to Perón in the 70s, and it was related to the media. And they said, Perón, you were kicked out of Argentina in 1955 because you tried to control the media and did all that you tried to do. And he said, my reflection in that every time that I tried to control the media, I was kicked out of the country in 1955. And every time that I was criticized, I didn't do anything to the media. I did this was my comment.
Question.
I would appreciate that whenever you're asking a question, please give us name and affiliation.
Amy Byers, U.S. Government. My question is about the way that people are reacting to the situation financially right now. I was an exchange student in Argentina in 1979 when they were having runaway inflation then, and no one was using the banking institutions. The family I lived with didn't even have a bank. We had to find where to go and exchange money. And I'm wondering, you're talking about the situation with the pension plans and everything. Are people now disincentivized to contribute to their 401k equivalents? Are they withdrawing from the banks? Are they withdrawing from the pensions now? And is this having an impact also on the economy?
Not yet. Hello? Yeah. I spend quite a lot of time in Argentina every month for personal and professional reasons. And you don't get a sense like that. You start seeing places that do not accept credit cards. And it's, part of the reason that I think things are more complicated is that now through technology, the government has quite a lot of control on knowing how people spend money and get the money. So it's not that easy to, for example, not being able to contribute if you are supposed to contribute. Banks are not experiencing a lot of drainage in deposits. In fact, the only sector where you saw that is actually dollar deposits that drop a lot. But you have to be nuts to keep dollars in an Argentine bank. Okay, so I think that at some point. So the rest, it feels you see a lot of urge in consumption, and that's what you see. People do not save. There are no ways to save except for real estate, and you see a lot of construction because, particularly for those people who have dollars and they can sell dollars in the private market. That, by the way, today is trading above 11 compared to 6.75 in the official. So the exchange is like it's like 60% gap. So if you have dollars, it's great to invest, in construction, and that's where you see most people, and that's why you don't see yet the panic, because we are not taking money out of the bank. Rates are so low, because it's part of the goal that the government has in terms of promoting growth, that you have a negative real rate. So it was never an issue. People keep the money in the bank that they need to keep,
But people are very smart also. They've been doing this for 40 years now. Every time there's a dual currency system, they know how to sell dollars for 10 and buy them, try to get tricks or get dollars in the middle, or the tourist dollar now. You can buy things online, even with the tax that the government has. You can buy abroad things. Now I'm moving to Argentina, and my friends said, so you can do this and do this and do this and do this. It's really complicated. Living abroad now, I'm not used to that. I think only Venezuelans really understand this, because you can do a lot of tricks to save like this little money over there, even with some of them are more sanctioned than the other ones. And that's the thing. Middle class people who have the expertise and the memory to do this, they can buy dollars, not in the blue market, what is called the blue market, but like buying bonds or selling bonds. You have access to some tools that the poorest people don't have, and they just spend the money as fast as they can.
Hi, my name is Daniel from the Harvard Kennedy School. This is a sort of two-part question, but let's just stipulate that a Peronist wins in 2015. What happens behind the scenes, A, in terms of coordination between the incumbent and someone from within? I know Peronism isn't a political party in the sort of definition in which it's commonly used in English, but it's rather some sort of corporatist entity. But there must be, depending on how close the candidate is to her, and one of them obviously has kind of openly declared that he will not make a deal with her, and another one sort of in the middle somewhere. But what happens is this going to be negotiated, or is this going to be a kind of hostile relationship in which the president might have an incentive to kind of leave a ticking time bomb from whoever comes after her, to sort of see, to almost to precipitate the crisis right up until the point she leaves, so you can sort of point to the successor and say, look, that didn't happen on my watch. Remember when I was here, you know, there may have been some, you know, wage issues and other levels of kind of economic uncertainty, but at least we didn't have the crisis. You know, the Kirchners are elected to end crises, and immediately whomever comes after me, there's another crisis. And the second part was that if it is Peronist to Peronist, what, particularly like holdout creditors, for example, what sort of interest would there be in some of the leading candidates to replace the Kirchners kind of doing their own negotiations and saying, look, you know, let's start working on this now because I'm going to want to hit the ground running because I know I'm going to inherit, you know, a very fragile state and a fragile economy, so can I do some of the spade work now to kind of, you know, return to debt capital markets, deal with the IMF, the Paris Club, the holdout creditors, all the kind of big issues that are kind of commonly flagged as the kind of, you know, necessary conditions that have to be fixed before Argentina does all the things that you guys collectively seem optimistic it will do. Thank you.
Peronism is like a very vertical country. A party, it's like follow the leader. They love nothing more than a winner. So when they see someone who's going to win and actually wins, the party sort of regroups behind the new leader, and in that sense, that's what's going to happen. Kirchner, but then it's probably, it depends. It's too far away still, I think, 2 years to know what's going to happen. I don't think Cristina has the leverage or the wiggle room to negotiate the level of the bomb ticking. You know, I don't think she knows if she can manage that. I think she's very proud, a proud person. I mean, so I don't think she wants to manipulate the crisis in the sense of leaving to the next person. She doesn't want it to happen. But I know also we haven't heard anything from her for 40 days now, and only like 2 or 3 days in the last 75 days. So it's also a mystery how she feels now, what's she thinking.
There are parents and there are parents. As you know, it is a very heterogeneous movement, and many of her most strident opponents have been within the Peronist Party. So the Peronist Party is far from united. As my colleague said, they love a winner, and she is and they're playing ball. But I think you'll find that support is not very deep in the Peronist Party. At the same time, she has to negotiate a parachute for herself. And, most people think that the governor of Buenos Aires province, Daniel Scioli, would be the heir apparent. And I'm sure that in return for support from her people, she will try to negotiate something with her designated heir apparent. So I don't think that it's in her interest to let things deteriorate too badly, but you know.
And yeah, clearly, I think that if it's not her, a lot of people close to her should end up in jail for a long time, and that is always some pressure that whomever follows her will have on her, just to say either you play ball or else. Regarding the holdouts, you know, that is a process that goes on its own, and it's run from the holdout standpoint in a fairly rational and tactical way. And I think that there is being disposition to solve this issue from the beginning. So it's more Argentina's, at some point in time, sort of remove this ideological blindfold, if you want. Because on top of that, there was mention about the exit loans, the World Bank loans that were fixed. And it was a hedge fund. They weren't companies. Actually, a hedge fund bought those loans from companies and sat down and negotiated with the government, and they got to a deal. So it's even more cynical, the whole problem, because there are good hedge funds or good vultures and bad vultures. So you have Gramercy and FinTech who are good vultures, and Elliott is a bad vulture. I don't know if it's the color of the vulture or what it is. But the whole thing is surreal in its stupidity. And so that should be solved sooner rather than later, and the government now is trying to fix it, but it's being influenced by some of those good vultures that I think have the wrong recipe in terms of how to solve the problem, but that's a whole different issue that, is for a different conference.
Myself, journalist. The Kirchner government has always enjoyed a special relationship with Monsanto and its large-scale production of GMO soy, which people at the grassroots say is causing a huge spike in birth defects and illnesses. Is the decision the recent decision to temporarily stop the building of the Monsanto plant in Colombo, a sign of deference by the government that the grassroots? Is this a sign to cater to people at the grassroots to turn attention away from the village? Much so, yes.
I haven't really followed the issue. I know about the plant, but the government haven't really showed any environmental concerns with mining or with soybeans or in all these years. So I don't really understand why.
I remember a conversation I had off the record with the governor, who is gay, in which he had environmental issues in his province that were very popular, in the sense that the people were very much aware and against, and he, very pragmatic, said, one of the things that he saw from the central government is that if he needed to address those environmental issues, there was no pressure from the central government to try to push projects that would cause that governor problems. But that I think is the heavy-handed nature of the government, that, okay, you're one of ours, so I let you run the politics here, so I'm not going to push a project there. So I think most of the decisions of that sort are extremely political, depending who is on each side of the equation. Are my supporters aligned with the people making the product, or aligned with the people against the project? And it goes back about this way of running things, that it's not ideology, it's just power.
My name is Edgar Gordon. Retired as the U.S. Treasurer and once was Treasury attaché, as a matter of fact. My question is, why is the opposition party so weak in Argentina? In other words, periodically you have a Peronista government of some variety or other keeps coming into power. But the old Radicality Party and the other, whatever else you got, never seems to be able to hold on very long, never seems to be able to organize itself to provide a real alternative to people who are running on a Peronista platform.
That's why he's going.
That's right.
It's a market opportunity for him.
No, there is. And I think one of the less studied effects of the big crisis of 2001-2002 is the implosion of the UCR, the Radical Party, because for better or worse, it covered the interests of what used to be called the middle class, and it had like 1/3 of the vote solid for many decades, and so its implosion generated a void that nobody really could, that was covered by more Peronism, like more variants of Peronism. The general election in 2003, there were 3 Peronist candidates that together they had like 60% of the vote. So, and in 2007, one of the opposition candidates was a former Peronist minister, so everything was covered by Peronism. All the other parties, it's true, they became very small or very dependent on leadership. The presidential candidates who lost in 2007, 2011, they quickly disappeared. Their relevance faded very quickly. The ones who lost in 2003 and 2003 too. So it's very hard to maintain and to build political relevance in a national scale in Argentina right now if you're not a Peronist. People say, remember that Lula lost 3 elections as he was building the PT's national structure, and then finally he won. That would be great in Argentina, but it sounds impossible. I'm going to work with the PRO party, the party of Mauricio Macri, the mayor of Buenos Aires, and it's the first time they're going to have a presidential candidate in 2015. It would be great if the party would have someone else, if they won't win, I mean, in 2019 and 23. That stability is good for the system, and I think one of the reasons to explain the big role that the Peronism had in these 10 years in the political arena is the absence of any other relevant actors. Many actors, but not working together, and they don't have to be working together. They're very different, some of them. So you cannot ask them, like a social democrat, to be working at the same time with Macri and everything. I mean, there's been a lot of pressure for them to work together, but I don't think it's fair. That someone has to build something, and the Kirchers really took advantage of it.
I think one weird privilege that you have as an Argentine working Wall Street is that politicians come all the time and they want to talk to Argentines in Wall Street. And one of the interesting things at a personal level is that you hear what they say in Argentina and you are horrified, and they come to you and they speak like if they were Margaret Thatcher. But anyway, I mentioned that because I had the chance to talk to another governor, educated in the US and relatively young and with projection in Argentina. And he was saying that the Kirchner was a very unique phenomenon post-crisis, and given the vacuum of power after 2001, you needed someone like them, very powerful, very centralist, but he didn't think that the political system in Argentina would tolerate another centralization of power of that nature. I express my doubts, because I'm thinking, once you see that it works so well, why are you going to change? Why are you suddenly put limits to your kind of, because Argentina is not electing presidents, it's electing emperors, okay, in the way it's working these days. But anyway, that is their view, that in a way part of the problem now is going to be extinguished once the Kirchners move away from politics.
Winston Wilkinson. Obviously, Argentina doesn't lack pride. I'd like to hear your viewpoint on how do you think Argentines view themselves and with respect to the rest of Latin America, as you see countries like Brazil and Colombia, Chile, Peru, Mexico, they're kind of advanced economically and politically and kind of left Argentina behind, whereas 10, 15 years ago, Argentina was always one of the countries that people, especially investors, were looking at as one of the top countries in Latin America, but that's no longer the case. And again, what's your view on how Argentines view their position relative to the other kind of leading players in the region?
Maybe a non-Argentine should answer this.
Yes,
You remember that caricature in the New Yorker magazine of how New Yorkers saw the world?
I know, not the West.
It was a big New York, and then, the rest of the U.S. was a little bit sliver or something like that. Argentinians are justifiably proud of what they have. I compare them to Texans.
Yeah.
Because, Texans like to brag, we have the best beef, and they do. They have the most beautiful country and everything. But sometimes it comes across as a little, you said that. I would not. But Argentina has been justifiably proud. I mean, they've had most Nobel Prizes in Latin America have come from Argentina. They won the World Cup twice. That's Uruguay, but God gave them a beautiful country with wine, resources, et cetera, et cetera. There's a joke about that, right? But I think many Argentines have angst, and they lead Latin America or for the world in visits to shrinks, actually. And I think plastic surgery tours, Brazil passed Argentina. Those are the two categories. Plastic surgery and beef consumption too. So if you're a vegetarian, don't go. But, you know, I think it's gotta hurt because they were the standard. They were the standard in Latin America. They had the best economy, they had the most advanced education system. And to see all that deteriorate, to see Brazil pass them in some ways, Chile being held out as a standard for the hemisphere, that's gotta hurt, and that has led to a tremendous angst on the part of Argentinians. And some people react to that by blaming others, by pointing a finger outside. It must be...
But we also say Chile and Brazil don't count. They're very unequal countries. It's not real what they do. There's all bubbles. They have the copper or they have the whatever. In Argentina, nobody believes that Chile and Brazil are doing a good job in energy. Or Colombia.
But it's, everything is gonna get solved. We're gonna win the World Cup and that's it. Okay? We're better than the rest.
But my wife was born in the Dominican Republic, and I can't tell you how many people, how many Argentines came up to us and how are things in Central America these days? Because in their mind, it's just one collection of little countries up there. But as I say, they're justifiably proud of what they have, and hopefully everyone will now start looking at a mirror and figure out problems.
It's interesting because part of what Cristina has always said publicly is talking about growth. And it's true that this misguided policy that had other goals have made her being able to say that Argentina has grown more than a lot of these countries, and missing the fact that GDP per capita, education, and everything is much better. So a lot of people, in a way, like to believe that. You know, people like to be deluded that they're better than what they are. We all do.
Well, we're coming to the last point in our discussion this afternoon. I want to thank you all for coming to us and participating in this event. And let's have a final round of applause.